We shouldn't underestimate how much Caleb Williams will benefit from having a more capable starting center in front of him who can take even more off of the young quarterback's plate.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we'll get a better sense of how important new starting center Drew Dalman will be for this Bears offense and for Caleb Williams. We'll hear Bears head coach Ben Johnson talk about that relationship between quarterback and center and the kind of expectations they're putting on Dalman, where they see him doing more in Chicago than what he was asked to do with the Atlanta Falcons. We'll hear from Dalman himself about how he guided Michael Penix as a rookie quarterback and how he's looking forward to doing some of the same things for Caleb Williams and some of the keys there to helping a young quarterback from the center position. And then we'll also touch on the other Bears free agent signing to start the free agent period, Dayo Odeyingbo, and where Ryan Poles sees him fitting into this Chicago Bears pass rush. And along the way, both Johnson and Poles kind of dropped some little hints about where the Bears draft plans could be at both offensive line and defensive line positions. But I want to start bigger picture here with Drew Dalman and Caleb Williams. Dalman had his introductory press conference on Thursday now that the signing has been made official. And he and Ben Johnson were both able to really get at that quarterback-center relationship. Obviously, Dalman will be an improvement as a blocker up front from what the Bears had last season in Coleman Shelton at the center position. But I think even more importantly than that, it's everything that happens before the snap. How Dalman sees the field, how Caleb sees the field, and what that relationship looks like, and how from day one they can start getting on the same page and building that up over the course of the summer and OTAs and minicamp into training camp so that those two can really be on the same page and get the best out of both of them as a result of this process. So here's how Ben Johnson described pursuing Drew Dalman and his importance to unlocking the full potential of this Bears offense.
With Drew specifically, when you watch his tape, what are the things as a center that appeal to you the most?
Yeah, I talked about intelligence, and that's, I think at that spot is critical. He's going to be the quarterback of our offensive line. He'll be setting the protections and the run game for us, something he's done in his past, and I think we can put even more on his plate than what he's been exposed to previously. And so I'm excited about that. He's still learning. He's still growing as a player, so he has not hit his ceiling yet either. He's already asked me several times, what did you see on tape that I can get better at? And so that's the type of person we're getting. He just sees this as the next step as in his growth, and I think that's going to translate to the rest of the room as well. We have some young talented players. I said to him earlier today that you usually play with 8 or 9 guys over the course of the season, so it's not just the starting group that needs to be gelled, but we have some depth players, some young guys that may or may not be in the building right now that we're going to be counting on, and he's going to help spearhead that charge in terms of getting everyone ready to play on Sunday.
Ben, I was actually asked a similar question, so I'll tweak it a little bit. Like in the eyes of kind of marrying the center with the quarterback, how do you envision Drew and having sort of a veteran presence there, stability at that position, helping Caleb in terms of what he's seen at the line of scrimmage and beyond?
Yeah, to me, those two positions, they work together. And so at the line, we'll kind of see what direction we want to take this offense. Is it going to be more of a perfect play mentality where we have multiple calls and we're getting to the right thing, or are we trying to play with more tempo? There's a lot of different directions we can go, and that's why we just need to get the guys in here so we can get started with that process. But Those two guys need to see the game the same way. Much like I was talking about, the quarterback needs to see the game through the play caller's eyes. Same thing with the quarterback in the center position, between the run game, making sure the perimeter unit is locked in with what the core is doing, and then in pass pro, everyone needs to know where our issues are so that we're not getting stuck in some bad situations. That this day and age, I think the hardest problems defenses give us is schematically in the pass rush game, the blitz pickup and those things, particularly on third down. And so I feel strongly that Drew is going to have the acumen to be able to help us out and problem solve. There's unscouted looks each and every week that as long as you understand the rules of protection, we can figure it out, but everything's happening quickly. So it's a fun challenge, and I know Drew and Caleb are looking to grow together that way.
Very interesting to hear Ben Johnson talk about Drew Dalman still getting better as a player. He is only 26 years old, turns 27, early in the season this upcoming year. So entering the prime of his career, but maybe not at his peak of what his powers may be at this point of the process. But also this idea of putting more on Drew Dalman's plate than he had before is particularly catching my ear here, because that can be optimistic, but also a little bit of a dangerous game when, I don't want to say dangerous is maybe too strong of a word, but you see a player on another team and you think, oh, we can do more with him. But until you actually get him in your building and work with him and actually see how he handles what you give him, it's one thing to be optimistic and hope that you can put more on his plate, but it's another thing to plan on his plate being able to take more. So I'm curious to see how Ben Johnson approaches that, because the Falcons offense didn't run as wide a variety of run concepts as Ben Johnson's offense did with the Detroit Lions. And maybe from a protection standpoint, they may ask Drew Dalman to do more as a result. And can he handle that? They project him to be able to handle that, but we don't actually know that until they get him in practice and try the things and see how he handles those things. So that's going to be really interesting to watch moving forward. I think having Joe Thuney and also Jonah Jackson, but especially Joe Thuney right up there with Drew Dalman will go a long way toward everyone's level of play elevating and everyone being able to handle a little bit more, because you also just have better players around you. So you don't have to worry about covering for your left guard as much as you might have been before, or covering for the lineman next to you. You can just focus a little bit more on what your responsibilities are and being able to handle everything that's on your plate at the center position. So I'm certainly cautiously optimistic about what Drew Dalman's going to be able to do for this offensive line. Briefly, there's one other thing Ben Johnson mentioned in there that I want to point out when he talked about, it's not just gelling with the 5 starting offensive linemen, but that you're going to need 8 or 9 offensive linemen to gel. One, that's them right away, planning on injuries on this offensive line. We know Jonah Jackson has an injury history. We talked about it a lot on yesterday's podcast. That to me sounds like Ben Johnson essentially admitting, these guys are going to be hurt sometimes, so we got to be ready for it. So I'm curious to see what that means for the investment in the rest of their offensive line. And he also said a line there about he's going to help the young guys, whether they're in the building already or not. And that to me also hints, hey, we're probably going to draft some one or more offensive linemen. Young depth that's not yet in the building would be either free agents or more likely NFL draft picks on the offensive line. So it felt like a little bit of a hint there from Ben Johnson that offensive line draft pick is definitely in the cards here, and also an acknowledgement that, hey, offensive linemen get hurt, and specifically some of the offensive linemen the Bears just added have a history of getting hurt, including Drew Dalman in the last couple of seasons. So they are preparing for that and not planning on having all 5 of these guys for all 17 games, which I think is a smart way to prepare for the worst and hope for the best in that regard. But I think it was interesting to also hear from Drew Dalman himself about embracing the opportunity and the challenge of working with a younger quarterback like this, having done just so this past season in Atlanta with Michael Penix. So we'll hear from Dalman about that relationship and what he thinks that will look like with Caleb Williams and what his goals are, how he can help a young quarterback in particular, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $200 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the net. So whether you want to ride on some underdogs or just take the favorites, you can make it super easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. If college basketball is not your thing, that's fine. You can bet on MLB, NHL, NBA, hockey. I mentioned hockey, I guess. The NFL draft, there's prop bets as well. You can get it all in the FanDuel app that's simple to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com for your chance at your $200 in bonus bets and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So we got to hear the coach's perspective on what Dalman brings to this offensive line, but I appreciated that we then got to hear from the veteran center himself about that quarterback to center relationship to kind of follow up on what Johnson talked about there. And I think particularly, I know it was tricky for Dalman last season because he got hurt during, I think it was a couple of games into the season. He had the high ankle sprain. I was going to just double check as I'm talking here. It was in the third game of the season. He suffers a high ankle sprain with, Kirk Cousins as his veteran starting quarterback. But then, when in his first game back, Michael Penix starts rotating in. And then all of a sudden, you look up before you know it, and Michael Penix is taking over as the starter for the final, handful of games of the Falcons season this past season. The final, 5 games, or 3 games as a starter, 5 games he appeared in. And so Dalman had to navigate that quarterback transition on the fly and didn't have the full summer and full offseason to work with Penix specifically and develop that relationship, right? Like it was all Dalman and Kirk Cousins the whole time. Cousins was the big free agent addition. Cousins was the one that Dalman was working with the whole time. And then, Penix works with the backup center and he rotates in, sure, sometimes, but to really sort of have the in-depth building of that dynamic was kind of forced on the fly. So I think that gave Dalman some good perspective and some good lessons on now that I'm trying to learn this rookie quarterback quickly, what can I do versus what I was doing with a very smart, established veteran quarterback in Kirk Cousins that maybe doesn't need the same kind of support from Dalman or the same expectations or the same hand-holding through whatever that process looks like for these quarterbacks. Rookies are always going to have more that they don't understand or need help understanding or need help working through. And Dalman saw that firsthand with Penix and now can apply some of that process to Caleb Williams, who's now obviously no longer a rookie quarterback and isn't totally brand new to this. But at the same time, Dalman has the opportunity to make Caleb Williams' job so much easier, not just in terms of his ability to block better and give Caleb Williams perhaps more time to throw in the pocket from that perspective, but also everything pre-snap and at the line of scrimmage that Dalman can take off of Caleb's plate so that Caleb can be more intentional about the things he needs to do to be successful. So here's how Drew Dalman describes his role in that, and then that relationship between quarterback and center.
As a veteran center, being that quarterback of the offensive line, it seems like it'd be really helpful for a young quarterback like Caleb Williams. You had some experience doing that with Michael in Atlanta, so I'm just curious, what are the ways in which you helped Michael come along at the end of last year, and then how do you think you can apply that with Caleb here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike's an awesome player and an awesome teammate. That was a pleasure, and I think the biggest things are your focus can only be on so many things at once, and there are things that his focus needs to be on, and they can't be on anybody else's plate, and there are things that can be handled by other people, so things like the snap count or elements of protection or the run game or that kind of deal. The less he has to worry about it and the more that we as an O-line can communicate together and diagnose together, the less he has to do it and the more he can focus on the things that are exclusive to him. And so I think that process played out a little bit with Mike, and then I imagine it'll carry over the same. It's all about kind of narrowing the aperture about what you're having to focus on and being able to kind of use the O-line as additional eyes for the quarterback.
So I think that's really going to go a long way for Caleb Williams, being able to focus more on just the things Caleb Williams needs to take care of and not having to get people lined up correctly and need to keep the protections in order and make sure every lineman knows exactly what his responsibilities are. Like, to have a more capable center to do all of that and to take more of that off of Caleb's plate can help him focus on reading the coverage and trying to figure out what route he's going to throw before he even snaps the ball, and then going through his progressions more quickly and figuring out if he should adjust certain routes or, send guys in motion, whatever it's going to look like, right? There's 1,000 different things on the quarterback's plate. And if Dalman can take a few more of those away and let Caleb focus more on the things he needs to focus on, that really can speed things up in a good way for Caleb, right? Instead of, it can sort of slow the game down, but speed up his processing because he doesn't have as much that he's trying to process through in that pre-snap process. A lot of processing today. I mean, it's not as though that Caleb Williams had some rookie center last season that couldn't help him at all. Like, Coleman Shelton was doing some of that stuff. I think back to the game against the Panthers when there was that hot mic where pre-snap, Coleman Shelton's like pointing out and he yelled, something along the lines of, "We've got effing fire, man," like pointing out the fire blitz, and you can hear Caleb go, "I know," and he's trying to get everybody lined up. Like, too often there was a lot of that chaos pre-snap where the play clock's running down and Caleb is shouting stuff at the line of scrimmage last minute, and it's like 3-2-1, he's clapping, trying to get the ball snapped to him, and there were some delay of game penalties, and also just some plays where, man, he didn't really have a chance to catch his breath for a second, then snap the ball, because some of it was the play call taking too long to get in. It wasn't all about the center specifically, but being able to have a center and now a veteran interior offensive line that can just handle more of that stuff, get the protections called out, identify the mic, identify where the blitzers are coming from so that it doesn't have to all be on Caleb's shoulders to identify all that stuff, I think will really go a long way. I think you can cut down on some of that chaos, some of that frantic hecticness that we saw going around pre-snap in the pocket, let alone all of the frantic hecticness that was happening post-snap in the pocket when you were getting some of that pressure from the interior and from anywhere on the offensive line where then Caleb's running for his life. Like, everything can just slow down a little bit and be that, a beat easier for Caleb in this process. And then he can really grow and shine as a quarterback here. The coaching staff then can focus on more of, his footwork and those kind of Caleb specific things, as opposed to like how to run and manage an entire NFL offense mostly by himself. Now, some of this also will require, the receivers to line up correctly, the tight ends, the running backs, etc., the rest of the coaching staff to get the play calling in and stuff. But I think you can really see the path here towards everything just being that much easier for Caleb Williams. And that goes a long way, and that's beyond just the level of blocking that Drew Dalman provides. So I think it gave us a good glimpse into what this process looks like and why signing a free agent center like this was such a high priority for the Bears right out of the gate, paying the second highest contract to a center in the NFL right now. To Drew Dalman, it's just as much of the pre-snap stuff as it is the post-snap stuff there. Similar conversation, I think, about the defensive line, where the Bears bring in some veteran pieces in Grady Jarrett and Dayo Odeyingbo to try and bolster that group. And Ryan Poles was able to identify a little bit more of how this pass rush is going to all fit together here. And in doing so, I think also hinted at some future plans likely in the NFL draft for what they want to do with this defensive line. And so we'll learn a little bit more about Odeyingbo and his versatility and how that works with what the Bears have and what it means the Bears still have to do next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Like, between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, sometimes it can be easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in, because Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I love it because it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts and investments and spending all in one place. So you can stop just managing your money and start actually building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple finance apps, you got one for your savings account and one for your credit card and one for your investments or whatever it is. You can check your finances, track that spending, and even plan long-term goals all in one place in Monarch. It's amazing. You can realize just how much money you're spending on different categories, and it makes it super easy to budget and save even more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's Monarch Money, MONARCH money.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first 12 months. So after we got to know new center Drew Dalman, the Bears also announced the formal signing and introduction of Dayo Odeyingbo. They had to kind of wait a day because they had to fly him in, sign the contract, pass physical, all that stuff before the free agent signings are official. That we could hear the trades, and then Grady Jarrett was a cap casualty, so that signing and everything was able to happen earlier. So that's why we heard from them on yesterday's podcast. But today was the true outside free agents that couldn't officially sign till Wednesday, and the deal wasn't really made official until Thursday anyway. And with Odeyingbo, right, we talked about him as kind of the upside play, someone who maybe hasn't been incredibly productive consistently throughout his career, but is still only 25, and you think his best football days are ahead of him. And Ryan Poles reiterated as much when the Bears had their press conference today. But I thought it's interesting to hear Poles talk about how he sees this pass rush all coming together and where Dayo Odeyingbo specifically fits into that, because I think there's a couple of key aspects here that I want to pin down on.
What is the best case scenario with this group? How do you see this playing out if everything works out the way you're envisioning?
Yeah, an improved pass rush. You can't have enough pass rushers on your team. But for this first group, to be able to line the different alignments, to be relentless, get the quarterback off the spot. Again, Grady kind of hit on all those topics yesterday. But for that part of our game, and we all watched the Super Bowl, right? Like, you want to have waves of pass rushers. So if all of those guys are getting better and they're working together, I really think we can affect the passer, and therefore it's going to put our team in a really good position.
Is the pass rush still a group that you're looking to add to?
Like I said, you can't have enough pass rushers. We're always looking to add and improve that group. But I feel good about where we are today.
Hey, Ryan, the sack numbers don't necessarily pop off the page with Dayo. What is it that you're projecting or hoping for or seeing in him in terms of being that guy opposite of Montez Sweat?
Yeah, if you watch the tape, you understand how disruptive he can be. And again, both inside and outside. And I also believe, he's 25. He's played a few years in the league. I honestly, and this goes into our collaboration and working well in terms of the front office and coaching staff. We believe that there's even more room to grow for him to continue to get better. I think it's really cool he gets to come here and play for Jeremy, our defensive line coach, who, they work together while they're in Vanderbilt as well. So
I agree with Ryan Poles that, the sack numbers don't necessarily accurately tally Odeyingbo's ability to disrupt opposing passers, right? You look at quarterback hits and pressures and pressure rate, like he's a better player than his sack numbers suggest. I'm not sure if he's, actually some secret superstar and he just happens to have low sack numbers. But again, like, this is a contract that you're paying him for what you're hopeful he can do in the future, not so much paying him just for what he's done in the past. So that's a big part of it. And then also this idea of identifying the positional versatility where he can rush from the inside and the outside. And that's definitely something he did plenty of in Indianapolis, and you can see him, playing a DeMarcus Walker-like role in Chicago. Because, like, if you look at how he was deployed with the Colts, Odeyingbo last season was on the outside, like the edge, about 78% of the time compared to, about 22% of the time inside. 2 years ago, it was more like 1/3 inside, 2/3 on the outside, and that's a little closer to what DeMarcus Walker was this past season, where he was about 70-30 defensive end versus defensive tackle. So Odeyingbo definitely fits in that mold. It's kind of worth noting the season that Odeyingbo had a career high 8 sacks was the season he played the most on the interior. I don't have numbers of like how many sacks were on the interior versus how many were on the edge. That's a little bit more granular than the databases will find. I want to go back through the tape and actually identify that because it shouldn't be too hard. I just don't have the numbers readily available there. But nonetheless, like to get the most out of this player, I think is to move him around and to get him those advantageous matchups. Because presumably, guys like Montez Sweat and Grady Jarrett are more likely to command double teams. And it's going to leave Odeyingbo and whoever the other defensive lineman is with more one-on-one pass rushing opportunities. So then game by game and opponent by opponent, you kind of scouting report scheme up and say, okay, do we want Odeyingbo versus their offensive tackle, or do we want him on the inside versus their guard? Which matchup in this particular game is going to be better for him and better for this Bears defense overall, because that then depends on who your other pass rusher is on the field. And that's the other aspect of this that I want to really pin down on here. Because Ryan Poles said, we're always looking at a pass rusher, but we're happy where we are now. Yeah. We kind of hear that all the time, right? Of course, every team is always looking to add a pass rusher, but every team, and right, even last year when they were going to sign Unique Ngakoue or whatever, like Ryan Poles says, we're happy where we are now, but we're always looking for opportunities. Like, yes, we've heard that all before. But specifically right now, the defensive line depth chart suggests a little bit otherwise. That when he talks a lot about Odeyingbo being able to rush from the inside, who's going to be the other defensive end then? If you've got Montez Sweat on the outside on one side, and you're kicking Odeyingbo inside a defensive tackle in passing situations, who's going to be the number 3 defensive end who plays all those snaps that the Bears move Odeyingbo inside? Somewhere between 20 to 35% of the snaps when Odeyingbo's on the inside. I don't think it's going to be Austin Booker, but if you look at your defensive line depth chart right now, he's your number 3 defensive end. It's Sweat, Odeyingbo, Booker, Dominique Robinson, Daniel Hardy, Jamry Chroma. Austin Booker didn't even play 300 snaps last season. I don't think the Bears are planning on Austin Booker being their number 3 edge rusher. To me, every time Ryan Poles talks about Odeyingbo kicking inside, that's him telling you they're going to get a better defensive end option to be that number 3, to play on the outside all those snaps when Odeyingbo is on the inside. Like, yes, if Odeyingbo's playing edge full time, you're fine at defensive end. But if he's kicking inside, you need a better option to fill in for him on the outside when he is on the inside. And that player, I don't believe, is currently on the roster. Now, maybe that's a free agent signing that happens over the weekend or an hour after this podcast is recorded. We'll see. I know, like, right as I was about to record this, they signed wide receiver Olamide Zacchaeus from the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about him on Monday's podcast, but this was, the pass rusher conversation here, I think, was more important to get in here, and the press conferences today can only fit so much in one Locked On Bears episode. So maybe that'll come in free agency, but I think it certainly opens the door for the draft. Just like Ben Johnson hinted earlier about, hey, probably going to draft an offensive lineman, Bears probably going to draft a defensive lineman. You've got 4 picks in the top 75, plus, a couple late round picks. I could almost guarantee one of the Bears' 7 draft picks will be an offensive lineman, and one of the Bears' 7 draft picks will be a defensive lineman. I can't tell you when and where specifically, but come on, like, they're going to use at least 2 of those picks on a lineman on each side of the ball. I'd be really, really shocked if they don't. They're not going to reach there, but there's going to be a point in the draft where those are the top players available on their board. And that shouldn't even be like a bold prediction or a hot take, considering how often the Bears have drafted linemen. Like, this has been generally a priority for this team. Last year they get Karana Magajgi in the 3rd and Booker in the 5th. 2 years ago they get Wright in the 1st and Dexter and Pickens in the 2nd and 3rd. 3 years ago they take Braxton Jones in the 5th and Dominique Robinson in the 5th. They've taken an offensive and a defensive lineman in every single draft under Ryan Poles. They're going to do it again this season. It's just a matter of early, mid, or late in the draft, but they're coming. So that's what the Bears got to prepare for here, and that's what we're going to look forward to in the NFL draft throughout this offseason process. We're going to get to know all of the top offensive and defensive linemen, all the prospects you need to know on the Bears draft board. We're going to break down for you right here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you want to look ahead to NFL Draft Talk, you can make Locked On NFL Draft your second listen today. It's hosted by Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. You get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. You can find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Coming back on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears, we'll break down the new wide receiver the Bears signed. I also want to talk to Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons about now Zacchaeus and Drew Dalman and Grady Jarrett all coming from the Falcons. So that might be Monday's podcast. But anyway, Bears free agent signings we'll have covered for you. And then when free agency slows down, we'll be on the NFL draft. And no matter what we're talking about, you can be sure that every Locked On Bears podcast is going to give you another opportunity to bear down.